I want to leave you with a very simple idea. Most professionals are not losing clients because they're not good at what they do. You are really good at what you do. You could be losing clients in small, quiet moments throughout this journey. And I think moments that feel unclear, delayed, or just slightly harder than it needs to be could be the real problem. I'm Sylvie Garibaldi, founder and CEO of a well-established marketing training and done-for-you services company, tailored specifically for the modern legal and financial professional worldwide. While it's taken some trial and error to figure out which methods get the best results for professionals who are looking to grow their practices, fast forward to today, my team and I have nailed down and perfected a process that has helped so many of our clients consistently achieve outstanding results and create a legacy for their practices. I created the Serve First, Sell Later marketing podcast to give you simple, actionable, non-salesy, and results-driven marketing to grow your legal or financial practice like so many of our clients have. If you're a lawyer, mediator, financial, or divorce professional who is looking to become highly visible and wants to create a practice that makes an impact, then you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 117 of the Serve First, Sell Later marketing podcast. I'm your host, Sylvie Garibaldi. So right now, somewhere, someone is Googling a problem that you solve. So they could be sitting on their couch, maybe it's 11 o'clock at night, their kids are asleep, and they're finally letting themselves type the thing that they're afraid to type for months. How much does it cost for a divorce? How does mediation work? What happens to my house if we split up? They find a few names. They click on one, they read a little, they like what they see, and then they hit a wall. The contact form doesn't work on their phone, or there's no way to book a call after hours, or they leave a voicemail and nobody calls back for 3 days, right? So they move on. They find someone else. And you never even knew that they were there. So today I'm going to be talking about something that affects every single person listening, whether you've been practicing for 20 years or you're just getting started. And we're talking about the client journey, specifically what happens from the moment someone Googles their problem all the way to the moment that they sign with you. And more importantly, where most professionals are quietly losing clients at every single stage without even realizing it. So I'm going to walk you through these 5 stages. And at each stage, I'm going to tell you what your potential clients are experiencing and exactly what you can do to make it easier for them to choose you. And here's what I want you to know before we actually start. None of this is about being pushy. None of this is about selling. It's about removing the friction that's standing between someone who needs your help and actually getting it. And that is the most serve first thing that you can do. All right, let's get right into it. So before we go any further, I want to give you a simple framework to think about everything that we're about to discuss. Because what most professionals experience as inconsistent marketing or clients not following through or referrals not converting is usually not random, okay? It's happening at very specific points in the client journey. And once you see those points clearly, everything starts to make more sense. So let me walk you through the 5 stages that every single one of your clients goes through, whether you're a lawyer, a mediator, a divorce professional, or some other professional working in a high trust service. So stage 1 is awareness. And this is where someone becomes aware of their problem and starts searching for answers. They're not searching for your name. They're not looking for your firm. They're searching for their problem. Stage 2 is consideration. And this is where they start comparing options. They've found a few professionals, usually 3 to 5, and they're quietly evaluating who feels like the right fit. Stage 3 is contact. This is where they reach out. They take that step, they fill out that form, they send an email, they leave a message. And what happens next matters more than what most people actually realize. Stage 4 is consultation. This is where they speak with you. They're not just gathering information, they're deciding whether they trust you with something that feels pretty important and very personal. And finally, stage 5 is commitment. And this is where they decide whether to move forward. They either say yes and sign, and they actually begin working with you, or they just disappear. Now, here's the key idea I want you to keep in mind as we go through this. At every one of these stages, your client is actually making a decision, not always consciously and not always logically, okay? But they are constantly asking themselves, do I move forward or do I step back? And your role is not to push them, it's to make that decision feel easier, to make it feel clearer and more natural. Because when the journey is clear and friction is low, people move forward. And when it's confusing or uncertain, you guessed it, they're going to hesitate or they're going to leave. So, as we go through each stage, I want you to start thinking and taking some notes about your own process. Okay, so where are things going well? And where might someone be quietly dropping off without you even realizing it? And so that's what we're going to uncover next. All right, so stage 2 is consideration. Now, let's move into what this actually means. So, this is the stage where your potential client has moved beyond simply trying to understand their situation and has now reached the point where they are actively looking at professionals and trying to decide who they might trust to help them. And I think by this point, they've likely spent some time researching. They may have read a few articles, watched a video, or even spoken to someone that they know, and they've reached a level of awareness where they realize that this is not something that they want to navigate alone. So naturally, what happens is they begin exploring their options, right? And what most professionals don't fully appreciate is that this process almost never happens in isolation, where someone looks at one person and then makes a decision. Instead, what we see is actually happening behind the scenes is that your potential client is opening multiple tabs online. Okay, so they're moving between different websites, they're comparing several professionals at once, they're probably putting your name into AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, you name it, and without ever announcing that they're doing this. So they're not filling out forms yet, and they're not booking consultations yet. They are simply observing, scanning, and forming impressions very quickly, I might add. And this is where something critical happens. They begin to decide who feels like the right fit, and not based on a conversation with you or anyone else, and not based on your full expertise, but based almost entirely on what they experience when they land on your website and your social media profiles and the Google searches that they do, and the Google reviews as well. Which means that something like your website is not just an informational tool. In many ways, it's your first consultation. It's doing the work of building trust, creating clarity, and helping someone feel comfortable enough to take that next step before you ever have the chance to speak to them. And if that experience is not clear or not reassuring, or not even easy to navigate for that matter, they don't stay long enough to figure it out. They simply move on to the next option. So, when someone lands on your website, especially in those first few seconds, and it's not just your website, right? It's your social media, it's your Google reviews, it's maybe an article that you're quoted in or a podcast episode that you're a guest on. So, they are carefully scanning and listening and reading for every word and analyzing every detail. They are making fast, intuitive judgments, and they're asking themselves questions like, am I in the right place? Does this person understand what I'm going through? Are they the right person to help me? Would I feel comfortable working with them? And if those questions are not answered almost immediately, then even if you are highly skilled and highly experienced, you are unlikely to be chosen at that stage. So let that set in for a moment. So let's talk about what actually matters in those first moments, because this is where you get to create momentum or you lose it. So the first and most important element for considering your website or your socials is your headline, right? And this is where I see many professionals make a fundamental mistake. They lead with their title instead of the problem that they solve. And I see this with very experienced professionals as well. They may say things like family law attorney or certified mediator or estate planning lawyer, just assuming that that establishes credibility. But for someone who's actually in the middle of a stressful or emotional situation, those titles don't create clarity. Instead, what they are thinking is, I need help with this situation. So a headline that speaks directly to their experience, something like helping families navigate divorce with less conflict, that immediately feels more relevant, right? I think you can see the difference rather than just saying divorce mediator or divorce attorney. So it sounds more human and more aligned with what they're actually going through. And it allows them to see themselves in your work within seconds. So the second element is your photo. And while this may seem like a small detail, it plays a much bigger role than most people expect, because in a moment when someone is deciding whether they feel comfortable reaching out, we do know that visual cues matter. So, a very formal, traditional headshot, while professional, can sometimes create distance. It can feel polished, but not necessarily approachable. So, the best approach here is something that's more natural, relaxed, but professional as well, that can signal something entirely different. It signals professionalism, warmth, safety, someone that you can approach. And in high trust professions like yours, that feeling does matter. The third element is social proof, and this is another area where specificity makes a significant difference because many professionals rely on general statements like 20 years of experience or dedicated to client success. And while those are all great and true, they do not help a potential client understand what that experience actually looks like in practice. So, what builds trust more effectively is always being more specific. So, being able to say, for example, that you have helped hundreds of families reach agreements without going to court, or that you have supported business owners through complex disputes, or that you have guided clients through high asset financial decisions during divorce, that level of detail allows someone to recognize themselves in your work, and it makes your experience tangible instead of abstract. Okay. And finally, the fourth element here is the next step, because at this stage, your client or your potential client is not looking for complexity. They're really looking for simplicity. They're not looking for multiple options or a complicated process. They are looking for something that feels simple, clear, and manageable. So, when a website or a social media profile offers a vague contact us option, or it requires a long form to be filled in before any interaction happens, guess what? This just creates friction, and you're going to lose them because you're going to lose them to hesitation. Whereas something like schedule a free 15-minute call feels very different. It's specific, it's low pressure, and it feels like a small, safe step forward. Now, depending on your specific area of work, there are also nuances that become important at this stage. So, for example, if you are a workplace mediator, your audience could be more complex. You may be speaking to HR professionals, leadership teams, or business owners, while also needing to acknowledge the experience of employees who are directly involved in the conflict. And so, what you need to remember is that these audiences think differently, right? They have different concerns, different priorities, and different ways of evaluating whether to move forward. So your website needs to reflect that complexity. Your social media profiles need to do that as well. And it needs to show that you understand both the organizational perspective and the human dynamics of conflict. Because if one of those perspectives is missing, you really risk losing part of your audience without even realizing it. So when you step back and you look at this stage as a whole, what becomes clear is that your online presence is not simply a place where people gather information about you. It's the place where they begin to decide whether they trust you. And that decision is happening really quickly, often emotionally, and entirely before you have the opportunity to influence it directly. So, the most important question to ask yourself is really whether it makes it easy for someone to understand that you can help them, that they feel comfortable approaching you, and they want to take that next step without that hesitation. Because when that happens, the rest of the journey becomes significantly easier.
Let's take a quick break.
If you're a lawyer, mediator, or divorce professional trying to figure out what marketing actually works right now, then this is for you. On April the 9th, I'm hosting a free live workshop called How Lawyers and Mediators Actually Attract Ideal Clients Today. Because what we're seeing is most professionals are doing a lot. They're posting, they're networking, they're trying different strategies, but not seeing consistent results. So in this workshop, I'm breaking down exactly what clients are really looking for, what's actually working today, and how to simplify your marketing so that it starts generating real opportunities. And I should let you know this workshop has not been offered in several months and space is limited. So save your spot now using the link in the show notes. I'd love to see you there. All right. If you're listening to this and thinking, this makes sense, but I'm not sure how to translate this into a system that actually works for my practice, that's exactly where we support our clients at SG and Associates. With lawyers, mediators, and other trust-based professionals, we help you design marketing systems that are realistic, sustainable, and aligned with how their practice actually works, not systems that rely on constant posting or nonstop effort. And if that's you and you find that helpful, please book a free strategy call with me. We'll look at what you're doing, identify what can be stabilized or simplified, and map out a clearer path forward. You can find the link in the show notes. Okay, now let's move into the third stage of the journey, which is contact. And this is where your potential client has moved beyond researching, comparing, and thinking, and now has decided to take action and reach out to someone for help. And I think what's important to understand here is that getting to this stage is not necessarily automatic, and it's not easy from the client's perspective either. In most cases, this decision comes after a period of hesitation, internal conversation, and often a certain level of emotional discomfort, especially in areas like divorce, family conflict, workplace issues. And I think by the time someone actually fills out your form or maybe sends an email or picks up the phone to call you, they are already significantly invested in the process. They're not casually browsing anymore. And I think that is something very important to understand, that by the time they come to you, they have done a lot of research and they are leaning forward and actively looking for that path forward. However, what many professionals I think don't fully see is that this moment, the moment of contact, is also where the largest number of opportunities are lost. So let me explain. It's not because the professional lacks skill or experience, but because the process of reaching them and getting a response introduces friction, stress, and at exactly the wrong time. So whether someone is reaching out to a lawyer, a mediator, a financial specialist, a workplace consultant, the same breakdowns tend to happen in very similar ways. And I think the first and most significant of these is response time. Okay, so from a professional's perspective, responding within a few hours or even later the same day can feel timely and reasonable. But from the client's perspective, especially when they are in a heightened emotional state or facing a pressing situation, let me tell you, that delay feels much longer and much more uncertain. Because in reality, they're not reaching out to just one person and waiting patiently for a reply. Think about this. They're often contacting multiple professionals within a very short window of time, sometimes within minutes of each other, as they try to find someone who will respond and engage with them. So when one professional responds quickly and the other one takes several hours, several days, several weeks, the difference is not just about speed, okay? It actually becomes a signal. A fast response communicates availability, attentiveness, and a willingness to engage. And a slower response, even if it's unintentional, can sometimes be interpreted as disinterest, lack of capacity, or simply uncertainty. And I think in that moment, the client moves forward with the person who made it easiest to continue that conversation. So I think the second area where friction commonly appears is in the structure of intake. So many professionals, in an effort to gather information efficiently, they create detailed forms that ask a series of questions before any direct interaction takes place. And I think while this is logical from an operational standpoint, it often doesn't align with where the client is emotionally at this stage. And at this first point of contact, most people are not ready to provide a full history or detailed background or comprehensive explanation of their situation. They are simply trying to initiate a conversation. So, when the process requires them to complete a long, multi step form that feels more like an interrogation than an invitation, think about it. It's going to create hesitation and resistance. When you've got to fill out a very long form, how do you feel? Are you reluctant to fill it in? Do you procrastinate? It's important to just establish rapport and have that connection before they actually fill in that form. And I know sometimes it feels counterintuitive, but there is a lot of merit in that approach. So the third point of friction relates to availability, particularly outside of traditional business hours. So if you consider when most people are actually researching these types of services, it often happens during moments when they finally have space to think. So that could be in the evening, late at night, or early in the morning. And so these are the times when the questions become real and when the urgency becomes more present and when they're most likely to take action. However, if the only available next step is to call during office hours or wait for a response the following day, okay, there is a disconnect between when the client is ready and when the professional is accessible. And in that gap, momentum is lost because someone else who offers a more immediate or flexible way to connect becomes the easier choice. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So, the fourth and most overlooked issue is what happens after someone leaves a message. So, when a client calls and reaches voicemail or submits a form and receives no immediate acknowledgement, they are left in a state of uncertainty. So, they don't know whether their message was received, whether they will be contacted, or how long they should expect to wait. And I think in the absence of clear communication, they begin to fill in the gaps themselves. Rightfully or wrongfully, they are doing that. They may assume that you're too busy, that their situation is not a priority, or that they should continue exploring other options. Even if you can't do the outreach and someone on your team can, it's super important to get that person or a team member or yourself to do the outreach as soon as possible. And I think what's important to recognize is that none of these friction points are typically intentional, right? They are often the result of systems that were designed for internal efficiency rather than client experience. But I have to say, at this stage of the journey, the client is not evaluating your credentials or your expertise in detail. They're actually evaluating how easy it is to take the next step with you. And ease in this context becomes a form of trust. And when the process feels simple, responsive, and clear, the client is going to feel much more confident approaching you. And when the process feels slow, complicated, or uncertain, that's when hesitation settles in and they're just not going to reach out. So the opportunity at this stage is not necessarily to do more, but really to simplify. So remove unnecessary steps, take a look at your process, reduce any delays, create a pathway that allows someone to move forward with less friction. So as you're listening to this, I hope you're taking notes and you're going through your process and you're thinking, okay, what one thing could I do here that Sylvia is talking about that's going to add value? And I think it's important to just take one small step. So one of the most effective ways I think to do this across all professional types is to really just provide a simple, direct way for someone to book time with you. And we are big fans of automated scheduling links. We use Calendly, that is a really popular one, that really just allows the potential client to select a time, confirm a call, and know exactly what will happen next without needing to wait for a response or engage in back and forth communication. And so this single adjustment really addresses multiple issues at once. Because what happens is it reduces response time, it eliminates uncertainty, and it aligns with the moment when the client is actually ready to act. So just imagine if they're interested in reaching out and you have an automated link available and it's readily available on your website, on your social media profiles, with a click of a button, they can just set up a time to chat with you. So when you think about the contact stage, the focus is not on increasing activity or adding more steps, okay? I hope I made that clear. It's really on removing barriers, removing friction. How do we make it easier? Because when it becomes easier for someone to reach you, to hear back from you, and to take the next step without confusion, you not only increase the number of conversations you have, you increase the number of people who actually can move forward with you. Okay, so let's move into the fourth stage of this journey, which is the consultation. And I think this is the stage where, for the first time, your potential client is no longer interacting with your content, with your website, with your systems, or any of your online profiles that they're seeing. They are interacting directly with you. And because of that, many professionals approach this stage with a very specific mindset. They believe that this is the moment where they need to demonstrate their expertise, explain their process in detail, and ultimately convince the client to choose them. But in reality, what's happening here is that the consultation is not primarily about proving yourself. It's about creating an experience where the client feels understood, supported, and clear about what happens next. And this is where your serve first philosophy is no longer just an idea or a concept. It becomes something that the client can feel in real time. Because the person you are speaking with is not coming into that conversation as a blank slate. They are often coming in with uncertainty, with stress, and in many cases, with a level of emotional overwhelm that they may or may not express directly. And so they may have rehearsed what they want to say. They may be unsure of what to share, what information to share. They may even be evaluating moment by moment whether they feel comfortable continuing the conversation. And in that context, what matters most is not how much information you provide, but it's how well you listen. So, a simple framework that applies across all of these professional roles in your audience is what I would call the 70-30 principle, which means that in a well structured consultation, the client is speaking approximately 70% of the time, and you're speaking about 30% of the time. And I know this can feel counterintuitive, especially for professionals who are used to leading the conversation, diving right into advice and offering solutions. But it's important to understand that when the balance shifts too far in the other direction, so when the professional is doing most of the talking, what happens is the client often leaves the conversation with information, but without a strong sense of connection or clarity. Whereas when the client has the space to fully explain their situation, to feel heard without interruption, and to express what's actually happening from their perspective, something amazing starts to happen. Trust starts to build because feeling heard is often the first step toward being understood. And feeling understood is what allows someone to begin trusting that you can actually help them. So I believe that the first goal of any consultation, regardless of your role or specialty, is to just listen and, ensure that the client feels completely heard, not rushed, not redirected too quickly, not managed through a checklist of questions, but genuinely listened to. And I think the second goal here is to help them see their situation more clearly, because while the client may come into the conversation with a lot of information, that information is often fragmented, it's emotional, and sometimes very overwhelming for them. So I think your role is to take what they have shared and begin to organize it in a way that creates clarity. So you need to help them understand what's happening, what their options could look like, and what path forward could realistically involve them reaching their end goal. And this is not about overwhelming them with every possible detail. It's just about giving them a clearer picture than the one that they had before the conversation began. And when that happens, the consultation shifts from being just a conversation to being a moment of relief. And I want to add in here that it's super important to always make sure that the potential client leaves the situation or the conversation with you feeling better, right? Whether they have more options, that they understand what's going on, but they feel like they're in a better place. We always want to make sure that we provide clarity to our clients so they are moving forward with some level of hope and purpose about what's going to happen next. For me, that's fundamental. All right, so the third goal here is to end the consultation with a clear and specific next step. This is an area where many professionals unintentionally create uncertainty. So they end the conversations with, "We'll take some time to think about it," or "let me know if you decide to move forward," without clearly outlining what happens next. Now, I understand you want to feel respectful and non-pressuring, but it often leaves the client in the same state of uncertainty that they were in before they reached out to you. So instead, a strong consultation always provides direction at the end. It explains what the next step is, how it works, and what the client can expect. And this doesn't need to be pushy or overly salesy. trust me, they will thank you for the clarity because clarity reduces hesitation, and hesitation is often what causes people to delay or disengage. Now, there's also one other important nuance to acknowledge, particularly for those of you who work in workplace mediation or organizational conflict. And I think in those situations, your consultation is often not with an individual who's personally experiencing the conflict, right? You're dealing with a team, a department, an HR. That changes the dynamic of the conversation slightly, okay? So the underlying principle remains the same. You still need to listen first. You still need to understand the situation from their perspective. But instead of focusing in on personal resolution, the conversation shifts towards the organizational outcomes. So, what does success look like for the team? What needs to change for the organization to move forward? What would a successful resolution actually achieve in the context? Okay, so while the language and framing may differ, I think the structure of the consultation of listening, clarifying, guiding, creating that moment of enlightenment so that they feel good about moving forward, all of those remain consistent. And so when you step back and look at this stage as a whole, I think what becomes clear is that the consultation is not about delivering information. It's about creating an experience, how you make them feel at the end of this experience. And an experience where the client feels heard, gains clarity, and understands exactly what to do next. And when that experience is done well, I think you're going to find that the decision to move forward no longer feels difficult. It feels more natural. All right, so let's move into the fifth and final stage of the journey, which is commitment. And this is the stage where your potential client has really gone through everything that comes before it, right? They've recognized their problem, they've researched their options, they've evaluated different professionals, and they've had a direct conversation with you. So in many ways, the hardest part is already done, right? They've opened up, they've shared their situation, they've started to see what the path forward could look like. And I think at this stage, many professionals assume that the decision is essentially made and that if the consultation went well, the client is naturally going to move forward. But what I have to say is this, in reality, this is where another layer of friction often appears, okay? And it is one of the most overlooked stages, I think, in this entire journey. Because what happens after the consultation, the process of actually moving forward, is where potential clients will drop off. And they'll drop off quietly. So, what do I mean by this? Not because they've changed their mind about you, but because the process of committing feels unclear, slow, or emotionally disconnected. And this is what I would call the last mile problem. Okay, so bear with me on this one. Everything's gone well up until this point, but the final step, saying yes and beginning the work, it's not as easy as it should be, right? And when that happens, hesitation starts to come back into the process for the prospective client. And the client begins to think, maybe I should take more time, or maybe I should explore one more option, or speak to another professional. Maybe I'm not fully ready yet. And what's important to understand here is that this hesitation is often not about the decision itself. It's just about the experience of moving forward. And at this stage, your role is simply to remove as much friction as possible and make the path forward seem simple, clear, and reassuring. Now, what that looks like will vary slightly depending on your role, but the underlying principle remains the same. So, for example, if you're a lawyer, whether in family law, divorce, or estate planning, this typically means that your retainer agreement should be sent quickly, ideally within minutes of the consultation, or at most within a short window of time. Because the longer the delay between the conversation and the next step, the more space there is for certainty to return. And that delay does not just slow the process, it actually weakens the momentum that was built during the consultation. So I think along with sending the agreement, a short follow-up message that summarizes what was discussed and reinforces why you are the right fit can really make a significant difference. And it's not in a promotional way, okay, but in a way that reminds the client of the clarity that they felt during the conversation. So if you're a mediator, maybe in divorce mediation, for example, the most effective approach is to move directly into scheduling the first session while you're still on the call, right? Rather than ending the consultation and shifting into an email exchange, you offer a few specific dates and times to secure the next step in real time. Because at that moment, the client is already engaged, already thinking about moving forward, and already connected to the process. And of course, once the session is booked, you're going to send the letter of engagement, you're going to send the invoice or the first payment that needs to take place. and a clear confirmation of what's ahead, what they can expect ahead. So if you're a workplace mediator, the dynamic is slightly different because the decision is being made, within an organizational context. And so I think in this case, the next step is less about immediate booking and more about providing a clear and structured summary that can be shared with others involved in that decision. And that might take the form of a concise engagement outline that explains the scope of the work, the timeline, the investment, and the expected outcomes. And I think in an organizational setting, clarity and structure are what allows decisions to move forward efficiently. And if that information is not presented clearly, the process just slows down or stalls. Okay. And I think that's important. And for, divorce professionals, for those of you that are listening to this podcast, that maybe you're a divorce coach, maybe you are a certified divorce financial analyst. The key challenge at this stage is often ambiguity, right? Unlike traditional legal services where the structure of engagement is more defined, these services can sometimes feel less clearly packaged from the client's perspective. So instead of leaving the next step open-ended, it's important to offer clearly what the starting point is here, right? So something that has a name, a structure, and a clear outline to the service that you're offering. So whether it's a divorce financial clarity session or a 90-day divorce coaching program, it's got to be very clear about what it is. It has to have a name to it, a price, and all that. Like it's got to be very straightforward. And I think this allows the client to understand exactly what they're saying yes to, which reduces uncertainty and makes the decision much more concrete. Because when the next step is unclear, as I've mentioned before, even a highly interested client is going to hesitate. So when you look at this final stage as a whole, what becomes clear is that commitment is not just about the client deciding, okay? It's about how easy you make it for them to follow through on that decision. The follow through on that decision is absolutely key. And that's where the ball is dropped. Because even after a strong consultation, the process can either support that momentum or it can quietly undo it. And when you remove that final layer of friction, when the path forward is clear, timely, and aligned, the decision to move forward no longer feels like a leap. It's the next best step for the client to take. So as you think about everything that we've walked through today, and I know I've shared a lot, but I believe passionately in this process, I want to leave you with a very simple idea. Most professionals are not losing clients because they're not good at what they do. You are really good at what you do. You could be losing clients in small, quiet moments throughout this journey. And I think moments that feel unclear, delayed, or just slightly harder than it needs to be could be the real problem. And I think what makes this challenging is that these moments are often invisible. I hope this episode has enlightened you into where clients could be dropping off in your process. And please remember, you don't see the person who almost reached out but didn't. You don't see the person who visited your website or social media profile and then left. So it can feel like everything is working, when in reality, there are small points of friction that are affecting your results in a very real way. All right. So it's about removing barriers that are getting in the way of someone who already needs your help. And if you can do this, everything will become so much easier and faster because you're going to have better conversations. You're going to attract more of the right clients, and you can create a process that feels more aligned, more consistent, and more effective. And this is all about progress and moving forward. Thanks for tuning in today. If you found this episode helpful, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a message or share your biggest takeaway. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes packed with actionable strategies to grow your practice. See you in the next episode.